My best friend Jake and I decided to go on a weekend camping trip to a remote forest we'd never explored before. It was late fall, and the crisp chill in the air added to the excitement. Jake was always the outdoorsy type, while I was more of a go-with-the-flow kind of guy. He had all the gear, the maps, and the experience. I just brought the snacks. After a few hours of hiking, we found a spot deep in the woods, far from the marked trails. The clearing was surrounded by tall, skeletal trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. As the sun dipped lower, we built a small fire and sat down to enjoy the quiet of the forest. By the time it was pitch black, we were roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. Jake, ever the horror enthusiast, began recounting a local legend about the area, a tale of a hermit who once lived in these woods. Supposedly, he'd gone mad after losing his family and vanished, but locals claimed they still saw him wandering, even decades later. We laughed it off, but the forest felt a little quieter after that. The crackling of the fire was the only sound, that is, until we heard a faint snapping of twigs somewhere behind us. Jake froze mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, straining my ears. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, but the sound was deliberate. Heavy footsteps crunching leaves, stopping, then starting again. It circled our campsite, staying just out of sight. Jake grabbed his flashlight and I followed suit. We shone them into the dark forest, but the light only seemed to bounce off the dense trees. "Probably a deer," I muttered, trying to convince myself more than Jake. "Deer don't stop and watch like that," he replied, his voice low. We sat there for what felt like hours, listening. The footsteps eventually faded, but the unease lingered. Jake suggested we sleep in shifts, just to be safe. I agreed. He offered to take the first watch, so I reluctantly climbed into my tent, leaving him sitting by the dying fire. I must have been asleep for an hour or two when I woke up suddenly. My heart was racing, and I didn't know why. Then I heard it, whispering. Faint, incoherent whispers, just outside my tent. "Jake?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I unzipped the tent and peered out. The fire was nothing but embers now, and Jake's chair was empty. The forest was eerily silent. "Jake?" I called again, stepping out of the tent. The whispering stopped. That's when I saw him, or rather, it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. The faint moonlight illuminated his outline. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and his head tilted slightly as if he were watching me. "Jake, if this is a joke, it's not funny," I shouted, but my voice cracked. The figure didn't move. It just stood there. I backed toward Jake's tent, yanked it open, and shook him awake. "There's someone out there," I hissed. Jake grabbed his flashlight and bolted upright. When we both looked back toward the tree line, the figure was gone. Jake wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but the darkness made it impossible to navigate the forest safely. We decided to sit back to back by the fire with bear spray in hand, counting down the hours until dawn. When morning finally came, we packed up in record time and hiked out without speaking much. As we reached the edge of the forest and got back to the car, Jake stopped me. "Look," he said, pointing to the ground. There, in the dirt by our car, were footprints, not ours. They led away into the forest, disappearing into the shadows.